I don't know what I was expecting when I started my trip to Tylerville, but it was not what I thought I would find when I got there. I did some research as I sat in the booth at Waffle House. Between mouthfuls of waffle and bacon, I studied the place I was getting ready to set out to. Tylerville, established in 1890, was a farming community. It had a small main street, a drive-in movie theater, and a bowling alley where someone who was a big deal on the pro circuit had started his career. Mostly what it had was cows, farms, and a lot of weird stories. Tylerville had become something of a black spot, and it was believed that a cult had taken over the town. The articles talked about some kind of incident that had happened in 2018 in which the townspeople had been slowly integrated into a nameless religion that had made the town its home. The town's population had dwindled significantly, and now most of the farms were worked by, and I almost choked on my waffle when I read the name, Bright Church. I looked at the name for a few minutes, making sure I wasn't imagining it, and when the waitress asked me if I was okay, I told her I'd just seen something that had startled me, and she snorted. "You kids and those phones, it's a wonder you don't see more startling things than that." She left with her coffee pot, and I kept reading. Sounded like Bright Church had some of the farms in the area under their thumb already, and the town itself was likely under its control too. I would have to be careful if I went there asking questions, and I decided that it might be best if I prepared for the worst. I finished up my meal, leaving a tip that made the waitress purse her lips, and got back on the road. Tylerville was about 3 hours from here, and when I stopped to gas up, I found myself thinking about the pictures that I'd seen of the place. It was very picturesque, a little middle American town that was probably as dependent on the crops coming in on time as the farmers were. I thought about how there was likely to be a farmer's market right on Main Street, and how in the fall there would be pumpkin patches and harvest festivals. The women probably didn't wear homespun dresses, and the gentlemen probably didn't wear suspenders and wide-brimmed hats. But they might. I reminded myself that this was a cult town, like that one in California run by the Indian guy, or the one with the yellow delis in them. It was possible that I would be marked as an outsider when I arrived. It was also possible that it would be a shell of its former self, and that I'd have to walk through a ghost town if the roads were bad. I thought about a spooky town full of shadows and strange people, and it gave me a shudder. I'd be going either way. I needed to get my answers, but I really wished I had a gun or something in case things got bad. I had a knife under the seat, a long one for hunting, but I would have felt better with a gun. I shook it off. I was probably being silly. The people I had always seen on the Bright Farm show had been Amish-looking, and I suppose that they would have implemented that kind of dress code onto the people of the town. I switched on the radio after driving for a bit, wanting to think about something else beyond the mystery of Tylerville. Turns out, that wasn't going to happen. "Hello, friends. Brother Thomas here with Bright Farm." The truck honked at me as I swerved into the other lane, and I evened out as the surprise passed. They were a big business around here, I supposed, so of course there would be commercials. "Are you looking for quality? You looking for a brand you can trust? Then put your trust into Bright Farms brand milk. Here at Bright Farms, we have the happiest cows and the cleanest grass for our cows to produce the best milk for your table. Looking for eggs? Then look no further than Bright Label for your breakfast needs. Bacon, sausage, juice. We've got everything for your table. Everything." It was strange to hear the voice that had told me to hurry a few hours ago, selling milk and eggs, but I knew that Brother Tyler had been a big part of the church. After all, they'd let him host the show, so why wouldn't they let him sell their milk and eggs and stuff? I felt like I was forcing myself not to hyperventilate, and the strangeness of the situation only got weirder the longer it went on. "Are you looking for something particular? Someone particular? Are you still looking for your mother, Angel?" A car behind me let out a long, low honk as I slammed on the brakes. Luckily, I was on a 4-lane road in some backwood bypass, because if I had been on the highway, I would have probably caused a major accident. I managed to pull over, getting some dirty looks from the cars behind me as they sped off. I was actually hyperventilating now, not sure what to make of all this. None of them had ever used my name before. They usually just called me Dear, but Brother Thomas had just used my real name. Don't get into an accident when you're so close to the answers you want. She's here, Angel. She's here, and all you have to do is find her. Well, that's not all you have to do, but I'm sure you'll figure that out once you get here. You're still coming, aren't you? I nodded, but realized he probably couldn't see that. Yes, I responded, a little impressed by how little my voice shook. Fantastic. I'm sure you'll get a warm reception in Tylerville. See you soon. The channel was static as I tried to catch my breath, and when I finally felt safe to drive again, I pulled back onto the road. It was another hour before I saw the sign for Tylerville. Tylerville, 60 miles. It couldn't be that remote if they still had road signs up, right? I started to wonder what it would look like as I drove closer to Tylerville. The pictures online had looked very nice, very folksy. They had also looked familiar, though I couldn't say why. It felt like I had been to Tylerville before. It was a fuzzy memory, like when you remember going somewhere as a baby, but I certainly remembered some of the town, despite having never been there. When it came into view, I saw it first from the top of the hill. Tylerville was no militia camp, no cult indoctrination horror town. It was beautiful. Tylerville looked like a postcard that you find at any Midwestern gift shop. The buildings were mostly brick and wood, the roofs slated or metal, and in the center of the town was a building with a big clock tower jutting out of it. Even from here, I could see people milling about on the street, going about their day-to-day lives below me. It looked peaceful down there, a place I might like to live. I had to remind myself that this was the place the Bright Church had taken, and that it might not be altogether safe for me, or for the people milling about down there. I put the truck in drive and went down to see if the natives were friendly. As I drove into the town, it continued to seem normal enough as I rolled down the street. Most of the women were indeed wearing dresses, but the men I saw favored button-down shirts and slacks rather than suspenders. They were walking up the sidewalk, stopping to talk to each other, but I didn't experience a lot of other traffic. It didn't take long before I realized I was the only car on the road, and the closer I got to the town center, the more people began to take notice of me. Most of them waved, some just stared, but I began to feel like a spectacle. They were smiling as they waved, their grins reminding me of the one that Miss Mary had always worn, and they waved at me with slow and deliberate swings of their elbow. As I came to Main Street, the shops watched over by the clock tower in the center, I saw that it was like some open-air farmer's market. There were stalls everywhere, people selling quilts and preserves, fruits and vegetables, even a few of them selling chickens or lambs in cages. The people buying were the ones dressed in slacks, but the ones selling had an old-world look to them. These were the ones in suspenders and homespun dresses, and they looked more like the people I had seen on the show when I was a kid. Something else I realized, though there was no way it could have been. Tylerville was the town they sometimes visited for certain segments of the show. Miss Mary or Brother Thomas would sometimes go into town to talk to people, a mechanic or a policeman or someone, and Tylerville was an exact replica of that town. I didn't know how that could be. Tylerville had only existed in this capacity for a few years. The Google search had said as much, but that didn't change the fact. The little brick police station, its bricks painted white and black, the market stalls in the park at the center of town, the mechanic shop I had passed with the flapping sign that read Docks. It was all from the show. I didn't know if the church had changed the town to reflect the show, or if the town had just been a dead ringer, but I knew it was the same. I parked my truck and decided to head out and try to get some answers. "Excuse me," I asked as I approached one of the booths selling jam. "Well, hello, young lady. Would you like some jam? I have blackberry, blueberry, strawberry, peach. Actually, I was hoping you could give me some directions. I'm trying to find Bright Farm, but I don't know where I can find it." The woman at the booth continued to smile unnaturally, looking as if she hadn't heard what I had asked. Her dress looked like she'd made it out of curtains, and it was complete with a bonnet that looked like something off of one of the dolls I had had when I was a kid. I couldn't tell if she was old or just bent, but she didn't seem too worried about that either. "Here, try some of these preserves. One taste and you'll want a dozen jars to take home with you." "No, thank you, ma'am. I need directions to the farm." A few minutes later, I walked away in exasperation, the woman wishing me a good day. It was like that everywhere I went. Every booth I stopped at held polite people, but they were only interested in hawking their wares and not in helping me find Bright Farm. It honestly seemed like they were intentionally changing the subject whenever I brought it up, and I wondered if this was what Thomas had been talking about when he said that getting here wasn't the only thing I would have to do. Was part of the journey trying to decipher their words or make them tell me what I wanted to know? I decided finally that I would just go to City Hall and have them tell me which farm was owned by the Bright Church. They would still have to file permits and things, and I could get what I wanted if I asked them there. I was walking across the lawn, heading for the building under the clock tower, when I saw someone backing up to my truck. It was a tow truck, and it was pulling away with it as I ran, waving my hands. The cop was another smiling fellow, writing something on a notepad as I came up to ask him what was going on. "I'm very sorry, miss. You were parked in a no parking zone. I had to tow your vehicle. Don't worry, it's going to impound. You can pick it up there." I looked around, not seeing any sign that said anything about a no parking zone, and when he handed me the ticket, he tipped his hat and gave me a good day. I snorted when I looked down at it, seeing it was for $50. I hadn't seen a ticket under $100 in so long that it was almost as jarring as the towing itself. Whatever, I thought, I'd just go down to the sheriff's office and get my truck back. I was walking down the sidewalk when someone came out of an alley and began walking towards me. He didn't look like the rest of them, and that drew my eye immediately. He was wearing a hoodie, and though I couldn't see his shirt, his pants were pajama material, favored by those in scrubs. They were dirty, the cuffs muddy as they hung around his slip-on shoes. His head was down, but it was pretty clear that I was his intended target. When he came even, he spun suddenly, so we were walking side by side, and spoke quietly to me from beneath his hood. "You're in danger. You need to come with me before they take you off the street." "I'm sorry," I said, not quite understanding. "You are in danger. Outsiders aren't permitted to walk freely for long, and you've walked longer than most." "I'm just going to the sheriff's office to get my truck," I told him, not sure why I was telling him anything, but suddenly feeling very nervous. "Trust me," he said, and I saw a pair of uniformed officers round the corner as he began. "If you go into the police station, you'll never come out again. Come with me if you want to be in your right mind when they take you to Bright Farm, if that's still your intention." "How did you—" I started, but he suddenly cut right down the same alley he had come out of, and I was left to either follow him or not. Excuse me, miss," one of the officers said. "We need you to—" I broke and ran before I could think better of it, following the man as he fled from the cops who had suddenly come after us. They broke off chase a handful of turns later, and I was left hoping that I had made the right choice as I followed my unknown savior. I looked out over the assembled faces and felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The pungent scent of an active sewer made me wrinkle my nose every now and again, and I wasn't sure how they had gotten used to it. How long had they been down here? How long had they been living beneath Tylerville? Above all else, I wondered how they could help me. The man introduced himself as Joseph, and when I asked him where we were going, he said it was something best talked about underground. We were making our way through the city's back alleys, and they seemed to be the real Tylerville. The buildings that didn't fit the aesthetic had been abandoned, and the town had seemed so much larger from the hill than the one I had found. The corpses of old buildings sat dark and abandoned, and when Joseph opened the door to one of them, I was less than surprised to see it was a dry cleaner. Scrub it up, cleanliness is next to brightliness. Huh? Joseph asked, holding the door for me as he let me in. Just something I remember from when I was younger, I said quickly, walking in before I could say something stupid. The old dry cleaner was dark, haunted by the ghosts of old laundry soap and dryer sheets. I heard rats scattering, the gentle scuttle of roaches, and then a much harsher sound. I looked and saw that Joseph was pushing one of the big double-decker washer-dryers out of the way. I went to help him, and once we got it aside, I saw there was a hole behind it. A hole that did not smell altogether inviting. Come on, Joseph said. There's people I want you to meet. We'd gone down, and the deeper we went, the deeper the darkness became. Joseph took out a flashlight, and he must have seen something in my eyes as we went down. He smiled, patting the tunnel lovingly. They're old Prohibition tunnels. Mr. Teeter found them by accident and started using them for storage. They go straight down into the sewers, and the sewers have areas where the work crews leave supplies. That's where we've been staying, living right under their noses. We came to the bottom, and I found a small tent nestled in the lanterns that hung on the walls. They hadn't dared to put generators down here, but it seemed that they had brought lights nonetheless. There weren't a lot of them, maybe 20 people at the most, but as we came down, I had the eye of every one of them. That was how I found myself meeting with what qualified as leadership in this stinking tunnel. Margot was a doctor at the small hospital, and James was a deputy in the old sheriff's department. They both had what the group considered authority, and Joseph had brought me to them before anyone could make too much of a fuss about me being there. I guessed pretty quickly that outsiders weren't exactly welcomed with open arms. At least, not until they were sure that they weren't going to sell them out to the Bright Farm. That was weird to think about, a group I had once equated with Mr. Rogers hunting down dissidents in their sewer, but I supposed a lot of things didn't make a lot of sense these days. Margot and James let me stew in a little room for a while before finally coming to me, Joseph in tow. Joseph looked less than excited about what he had done, and apparently, after a thorough chastising, he was fit to hover on the outskirts of the conversation. Margot kept shooting him less than pleased looks. Her dark hair looked almost crazed as it frizzed around her head. She was still wearing blue scrubs, the kind you usually saw on TV, probably making her a surgeon or something. But she had traded her white coat for something a little more practical. Deputy James, Sheriff James was what most of them called him, even though that wasn't really how it worked, looked like he had just been trying to make it till retirement when all of this had popped off. He had an almost bald head with a fringe of silver around the edges and down his neck. He was still in uniform, but his jacket was tattered and his holster was empty at his hip. "Well, despite Joey's lapse in judgment," Margot said pointedly, "it has come to our attention that you've been asking a lot of dangerous questions around town. Is there some reason why you have a death wish?" "I was just wondering about the church," I said, trying not to let the implications sink in too deep. "I used to watch the show on TV and wanted to—" "Impossible," James said. They've only been here for a couple of years. There's no way they had a whole TV show already. Margot sniffed. I told you, James, they're older than that. There's no way they could have organized a takeover like that out of nowhere. They were cohesive, they were guided, and I doubt this is the first time they've done this. She turned to look at me, looking a little less angry now. This show, did it tell you to come here? I shook my head, but not very convincingly. Not when I was a kid, though the town in the show was basically this town. You have all the landmarks here, all the places they went to on the show, and I don't think that's a coincidence. James nodded. You'd be right about that. Ever since they took over the town, they've been changing it. They abandoned the buildings that didn't fit, they changed the ones that do, and slowly they're taking Tylerville and turning it into something different. You said they took the town years ago. How have you all been living down here for 2 years? I asked. Not very well, James admitted. There used to be more of us, about 50, and it was cramped down here. The food we had went pretty quick, and we had taken to scavenging in the night. The sewers go to most parts of town, as well as the local farms. We sneak out at night and scavenge sometimes, downright stealing other times, and some of us go out by day to gather information on the farm so we can try to find a weakness or recruit more people. We've tried taking in outsiders before, but they don't usually last. We lost people to the sheriff and his bunch, to the farm. Hell, some of them just leave on raids and never come back. So yeah, not well is the best way to answer your question. What's your business with the farms? Margot asked, trying to get the conversation back on track. Surely you didn't find Tylerville all on your own. This was the portion of the interrogation where I knew I would have to lie, just a little. There was no way in hell I was going to tell these guys that I suspected Miss Mary was my mother. They would probably kill me out of hand just for the association. However, I thought that telling them about Brother Thomas might be a little bit safer. I used to watch the show when I was younger, but my dad told me that I couldn't. I never knew why, but I think now he believed it was dangerous. My grandma told me later that he believed they had taken my mother right after I was born. I found the old TV I used to watch it on. It's in the front seat of my truck. It suddenly came on and spoke to me in the voice of the show's host, Brother Thomas. He told me that if I wanted to find my mother, I should come to Tylerville and look for Bright Farms. I'm guessing that he probably knew I would get trapped by the cops or the residents here, and that was why he told me to come in the first place. They meant to catch me, like they had caught my mom. But if she's alive, then I need to find her. Margot and James looked at each other for a long moment, like an old married couple discussing silently whether the kids could have ice cream this close to dinner. Kid, James finally said, if your mom's still alive, then she's not your mom anymore. Once those brat bastards get inside your head, there's no going back. She's theirs now, root and stem, and trying to get in would just be throwing your life away. I tried not to cry, but I could feel the tears leaking down my face as I became frustrated. I have to try. If there's a chance that I can save her, then I have to try. Sheriff, Joseph said, what about the... No, James said without hesitation. She's going in there whether we like it or not. If it can help her, she doesn't know what she's talking about, and we certainly aren't going to put a bug in her to root out the devils. It ain't right, Joe, and you know it. I latched on to what they were saying. I'll do it. Whatever it is, I'll do it. If it'll help me get my mom back, I'll do it. James cursed, wiping a hand over his bald head. You don't even know what you're talking about. You do this, kid, and there might not be any finding your mom. Once this thing gets inside you, it takes over. It wants these bastards as much as we do, but It also wants to eat us along the way. It'll chew through anything that it can get its teeth into. That includes people who are trying to help it. There might not be any coming back from this, and all we've managed to do so far is contain it. If we turn it loose, then it could be the end of everything. I looked up and could swear I heard the tears sizzling on my cheeks. I'll do it. No matter what the cost, I'll do it. He looked at Joseph, his sigh coming out almost bitter. Damn you, Joe. You just couldn't keep your mouth shut, could you? Joseph stood a little taller, and he used the extra few inches to make himself look imposing. If it can help, then why wouldn't we let her use it? James looked at Margot, but she just shrugged. As long as she takes it with her when she goes. I never liked having it here. It's creepy. James threw his hands up in defeat, but rounded on Joseph as he poked him in the chest. Fine, but you can go with her and make sure it doesn't eat her up halfway there. Joseph nodded. That's fair. It was my suggestion, after all. Come on, James said. If you're taking it, then let's get this shit show on the road. We left the little room and walked through the tent camp. I could see the sad collection of people, all looking like moles as they hunkered beneath the earth. They were utterly dejected, looking defeated already, and even then I saw the furtive glances towards where we were going. James was sorting keys off a ring, and Margot made some excuses to go back to camp before we came to a door at the back of the sewer. We used to lock the supplies back here when I worked for the city. The cops had some gear down here, the maintenance guys had more supplies, but I think the city planners had some stuff down here too. The tunnel isn't a very closely guarded secret, and it only goes to show how much brain rot comes with the brat. Anyway, this is where we keep it, behind a door, so it can't hurt anybody else. Unlike the rest of the sewer, lit by lamps or small lights, this place shone like the sun. There was a generator back there, powering 3 large floodlights that were all pointed at a chair in the corner. The occupant of that chair was in a straitjacket that had been zip-tied to the chair. He was grotesquely fat, his flesh pushing at the coat like an overfilled sausage threatening to burst its casing. His eyes were hooded like a hawk, and his mouth was covered with a muzzle that looked like it had once belonged to a large breed of dog. The lights put him in a constant spotlight, and he seemed almost pinned by them. He didn't struggle against the straps, and if they bothered him, you'd never know it. From behind the mask, his mouth was in a constant rictus of a smile. I took a step back, not quite sure what to make of this, and as James took a step into the room, the creature moved its head and smiled in his direction. "What the hell is that?" I asked. "What are you doing to him?" "Not a him," James said, checking something behind before taking out his pocket knife and cutting one of the zip ties. "It stopped being a person on the night we took to the sewers. It used to be the theater teacher at the high school, a man named Corbin Hoff. Something got a hold of him, something the brat doesn't like. He infected a few other people before we could restrain him. I think they're still running around in the woods somewhere, grinning like fools." Before he cut the last of the zip ties, he wrapped a chain around the man's neck and hooked it with a padlock. The creature strained at the chain, but the only sound it made was a low, maddening chuckle. It was the laughter you sometimes heard coming from an insane asylum. It was the laughter that bubbled up from hell. James leaned down, telling the creature exactly what he expected of him. "Listen to me, you son of a bitch. I don't know how much of Corbin is left in there, but I want you to take this girl to the farm. I know you know where it is. I know you want to go there as much as she does. So you take her there. Then," he tossed me the keys to the lock and looked up at me, "you can decide if you want to release him or not. If he served his purpose, cut him loose. If he hasn't, tie the bastard to a tree for all I care and let him rot." The laughter scuttled out again, and I had to hold back a shudder as it walked across my spine like mouse feet. He had said it to me, but he handed the end of the chain to Joseph, who looked less than pleased at the prospect of holding the thing. "I don't understand," I said, trying to hold back tears as the strangeness washed over me. "What is going on?" "This thing'll take you to the Bright Farm, if you still intended to go." Why can't you just tell me where it is?" I said, getting frustrated. "'Cause we don't know," he almost growled. "We know where it should be, but it's never there when we look. Something's hiding it, and I think this thing can find it. Whatever it is, it hates the farm people as much as we do. It wants to hurt them. We were saving it just in case they found us, but if helping you helps us cause a little chaos, then I guess it's worth the loss. Creepy bastard just laughs all night anyway. It's been making people very uneasy. Just take him and go. And Joseph," he looked up at the kid, "don't come back till she makes it to the farm." Joseph and I walked through the shadowy, smelly halls of the sewer, our guide moving ahead of us excitedly. I had started out with the leash, trying to keep a handle on the thing, as it tested the limits of my control. The constant little chuckles echoed off the wall like rat feet, and it turned its head fitfully as it took the sewers like a bloodhound. Wherever it was going, it seemed to know the way, and it wanted to get there as quickly as possible. After watching me struggle with the thing, Joseph had finally just taken the leash and seemed to have an easier time handling it. "So," I said, as the tunnel stretched out before us, "how did it all come to this? You guys living underground, I mean." "Believe it or not, it started with the farmer's market." "Really?" I asked, not sure I believed him. "Well, not really, but it really took off after the farmer's market was established. I guess it started with that weird group moving into the old McCurdy ranch. Charles McCurdy had sold 300 acres out at the edge of town, and we had all expected to see a dairy farm or maybe a turkey farm take over the old place and breathe life into the town again. Instead, we got a bunch of Amish-looking people who showed up on the first day of the farmer's market in wooden wagons like old-timey pioneers. They had jams, jellies, quilts, vegetables, even some animals. They were a big hit, though no one knew that they had such a stock of goods after being on the property for less than a month. Our shackled guide sniffed left and right as we came to another divide and took another right. "When did they start to change?" I asked, knowing there would be a change a-comin'. It didn't take long. I worked with the emergency service line, and in Tyler, I dispatched fire, police, and medical. We started getting calls about weird people walking through people's yards at night, strange break-ins that resulted in calls back later telling us that it had been nothing, reports of strange chanting, just weird stuff that had never been a problem in Tyler before then. The people they reported, individuals in homespun dresses and suspenders, sounded a lot like the people who had came to every opening of the farmer's market, and the police started wondering if the new residents of the farm had ulterior motives. Maybe they were religious nuts bent on recruiting. Maybe they were just interested in taking people and forcing them to accept their weird religion. Maybe the people just didn't want them around, and this was their way of getting rid of them. Whatever the case, the reports started coming in less and less, but the ones that did come in were just disturbing. People would go missing when they went to investigate. The people who had called in just the day before to report strangers on their property were suddenly manning the stalls at the farmer's market, selling jams and jellies and quilts. They had changed, been indoctrinated, and nothing could bring them back. He stopped talking as our guide sped up, getting down to run on all fours as it made its way towards the end of the tunnel. It took no notice of the filth that was running through, and I winced as its hands came down in something dark and soft. It was too filthy, the two of us running along behind it as it took the corners seemingly at random. When it turned left, I was left squinting at the emergency lights at the end of the tunnel. I knew we were getting close to escaping the cramped, smelly underground then. We came out of a large, ridged tube that was leaking water into a dirty culvert. The ditch stretched into a shaggy grassland, the timothy grass swaying in the phantom breeze, and I could see the sun making its slow trek towards the bottom of the horizon. It was about 3, I figured, and we had some daylight ahead of us. Fortunately, the tube wasn't very high off the ground, because the chained thing jumped into the muddy ditch, and Joseph and I were forced to go after it. We both plunged into knee-deep mud as we made our way through the ditch, and I asked how that led to them living like the Morlocks. Well, at first, we were staying in the hospital. Dr. Margot had sort of taken charge of the people in the hospital who hadn't changed, and we were hunkered down as the town transformed. The people who had been indoctrinated had gone to the farm, a farm that was no longer exactly where it should be, but now they were coming back to take the town, and those left behind. We had locked all our doors. The Bright followers were too weak to break through. But one night, we had something different try to get in. We saw flashing lights and realized there were cop cars parked by the ER door. James and 2 other officers were out there, and they begged us to let them in before the Bright followers could get them. After some discussion, Margot let them in, and she asked where the rest of the police department was. Turned out, James and these 2 officers were all that was left of the sheriff's department. They'd gone with Sheriff Wheeler, the old sheriff, to the Bright compound, wanting to rescue the people they had taken. They'd gone in with 15. Jacob and the other 2 were the only ones left. They had taken over the town, and Jacob said they were making their way to the hospital in force. It was okay, though, because he had a plan that would see all of us put somewhere safe. We came out of the ditch into the overgrown area between the farmlands. It was all fences and croplands as far as I could see, and Jacob kept looking around like the farm we were looking for would just appear. The thing on the leash was having the time of its life, plowing into the tall grass like a shark on the prowl for fish. It was taking us towards the outskirts, heading unerringly east as we headed for God knew what. He took Margot into the basement and showed her the sewer entrance. All the older buildings had one, maintenance hatches that helped with upkeep on the ancient sewer tunnels beneath Tyler, and it just so happened that he had the key. It's impossible to get into the tunnels without the key, he told her, so once we go down, we should be safe. There weren't a lot of us, maybe 40 or 50 people, and we stripped a lot of stuff from the hospital before disappearing into the sewers. It's been a couple of years since then, and though we lost a lot of people to the Bright, we endure. We were wading through the grass, and I expected that any minute now, one of us would come down on a snake or a hornet's nest, and we'd be really screwed. Whatever the smiling thing was, however, it didn't seem to have any fear. It was heading straight for something, and I had a feeling it knew right where the farm was. But how much longer can you hold out? I asked, dodging around brambles as we jogged through the unkempt field. Why not leave and get help, or why not leave for good? Jacob shrugged. Joseph only shrugged. Where would we go? Most of us don't have any money that's not wrapped up in the bank we can't go to. Our homes are here. Most of us can't just pick up and leave. We just stay and hope that things will change. It's all we can do, he said, sounding less than hopeful. I hated that, the hopelessness that lingered in Joseph's voice. It was pretty clear that he didn't think they would ever get the town back, and here I was using them to find Bright Farms so I could meet someone who just wanted another warm body for her church. As we walked through the field, I thought about letting this creature go and just telling Joseph to go home. What right did I have to use him for my own personal gains? In a way, I was just as selfish as the members of the church. Maybe I was right to seek them out. Kind calls to kind, after all. The sun had begun to dip, sunset on the horizon, when we crested a hill and saw it. It was just as it had been in the intro to the show, and my breath hitched in my throat as I looked down upon it. There was the general store, the white roof standing out amongst the other, more uniform buildings. There were a lot of tall, dark buildings behind it, the Wonder Barn, long and thin, like a cigar on its side, and the church as it sat with the woods at its back. The farm was surrounded by cropland and pasture, the whole thing ringed in by oaks and pines that looked like they'd been here for ages. The whole thing sat crouched like a sleeping cat, looking benign and inviting before the claws came out. When Joseph put the chain in my hand, I looked at him in confusion. "What? Aren't you coming with me?" "Not a chance. I brought you here. We found the place, but there isn't enough money in the state to make me go into that place with you." He was making his way back the way he'd come, and I couldn't help but feel a little miffed as he abandoned me. "You're just gonna let me go in by myself to face God only knows what?" He shrugged. "It's what you wanted, right? I just agreed to help you find the place." I had just reflected that at least I had the whatever it was to keep me company, when I was suddenly jerked forward and fell headfirst into the prickly shafts of that thick timothy grass. My guide went charging into the tall grass, rushing down into the valley like an arrow fired from a bow. I tried to get up and give chase, but even as I ran after it, I knew I'd never catch him. He was on all fours, running flat out for the woods around the farm, and I was barely keeping him in sight. As the sun sank lower and night became more than an idea, I realized the futility of it and stopped to catch my breath. I didn't need him anyway. I knew where I was going, and I was closer than I had ever been. The sun had still been up as I stood at the top of the hill, but within the trees that surrounded the farm, it was the soupy dusk that comes before night. Everything seemed to shimmer, the shadows making the forest seem like a mirage. The air seemed too thick, too substantial, and I almost expected to bump into something as I came through the forest. It was like invisible things hunted me on the edge of my vision, and I had to stifle a shriek when a twig snapped not far from me. I wanted to bolt, to run through the woods like Snow White, but I needed to keep my head. The trees hadn't looked so numerous, and I knew I'd come out of them any minute. They ended as abruptly as they had begun, and I got low as I came to the edge of the road that led to the general store. I could see there in the distance the white roof at odds with the black wooden structures, and I breathed in an excited, terrified breath. I was here. I'd arrived. I'd come to Bright Farm. I wanted to run up to the building, to throw the door open and find my mother behind the counter, smiling in expectation. She would greet me, she would embrace me, and through some kind of hidden magic, I would convince her to come with me. She would leave the farm, we'd go back home, where we would live happily ever after, as a family. It was a happy daydream, but I still kept low and quiet as I approached, knowing that if anyone but my mom, and maybe Brother Thomas, saw me, then it would be very bad for me. I snuck up the road, not encountering anyone, and that seemed odd. The lights were out in the general store, and all the houses were dark and seemed uninhabited. Surely they didn't turn in this early, I thought. The sun wasn't even down all the way. And when I found the general store locked, I nearly cried out in despair. I'd come so far, I'd risked so much, and now they were gone. I didn't know where they were, but at that moment I was afraid they had simply picked up stakes and moved on. I was sitting on one of the rockers on the front porch when something made me squint and turn to look out into the field. There, coming from the doors of the chapel, was a bright line of light, that seemed to be escaping through the crack in the center of the double doors. It was the only light to be seen, and despite the chapel being nearly a mile away, I could see it clear as sunrise. The windows were lit as well, though their light looked a little more muted than this all-intrusive bright emanation. Before I knew it, I was walking towards the chapel, my feet knowing the way, even if my brain hadn't caught up. I was stepping off the porch when the door opened, and I was left looking at a familiar form lifting a lantern towards me. "Angel, right on time," Brother Thomas said. "If you'd come with me, we'll get you to your mother." I was hesitant. Who wouldn't be? But I found myself going with him after a moment of contemplation. I know that sounds nuts, but I didn't feel as if I were talking to a stranger. I had watched this guy on TV for a long time, and he just seemed like a family friend to me. He took me inside and hung the lantern up over the bar, smiling hugely as he brought his hands together. "Welcome, my dear, welcome to my general store. I'm so glad to see that you've come to Bright Farms at long last." I blinked. It was like he was doing nothing more than opening the show for another episode. Was he crazy or just a little simple? I didn't know, but when he brought a rough brown sack out from under the counter, I took a step back. He laughed, not seeming to understand. "Don't worry, my dear. There's something a little less conspicuous for you to wear while we cross the farm. We wouldn't want to have to answer questions before we find your mother, would we?" That made sense, I supposed, and I opened up the sack to find a homespun dress, a bonnet, and some underthings. There were no shoes, but I supposed my tennis shoes wouldn't show from under the dress. I ended up just pulling the dress on over my clothes and slid the bonnet into place as I handed him back the undergarments. He nodded, clearly having expected me to change, but he accepted the bag and indicated I should follow him into the store. "I had expected you sooner," Brother Thomas said, as we walked through the back of the general store, "but I suppose later better than never." "Yeah, I imagine you did," I said, putting some things together, "probably in a squad car." Brother Thomas laughed to himself. "Well, yes, but only because the sheriff is such a good friend to the church. We had him on the lookout for you so we could get you here before the ceremony, but he said he had lost track of you. That's dangerous in Tylerville, my dear. Some people in town don't think much of us." "I can imagine," I said, not really wanting to tell him about the people in the sewers. They were fighting for their lives, it seemed, and I had no illusion about the idea that Brother Thomas could end that struggle. We had been walking as he talked, and we came to a halt outside a huge cowshed I knew as the Wonder Barn. This was the place where miracles happened on the show, and I wondered how many miracles actually took place behind those doors. "Your mother is inside," he said, putting a key into the lock and opening the door wide. "In the Wonder Barn?" I asked, and when he nodded, I crossed my arms. "Why isn't she in the chapel where the service is being held?" "Because I called her here. She didn't want to come, but when I told her that her only daughter was waiting for her, she came quick enough. She's been waiting for a while, so if you intend to see her before the ceremony, I'd shake a leg." I was hesitant, but what if he was right? I didn't want to start off on the wrong foot, and I was already so late. Brother Thomas had led me here, after all. Why would he now try to mess things up when I was so close to the finish line? I stepped inside, studying myself as he smiled and nodded. 15th stall on the right, dear. You can't miss her." I turned to ask if he was coming too, but that was when he closed the door and left me in the dark. I knew it, I chided myself, pounding on the door and yelling for him to let me out. Then the lights began to come on, a string of dome lights that seemed to go on for miles, and I saw the pins spread out like holding cells. As I watched, a familiar voice came down the hall, calling my name. It was her. It was my mother. She was calling me. "Angel, is that you? Come to Mother, Angel. I've waited so long." I was running before I could stop myself, and the stalls flew by as I silently counted. The stalls were interesting, but my mind was set. There was treasure in some, a whole car in another, children and things, and all kinds of stuff. Some of them were dark, too, shadowy corridors full of reflective eyes, and these I barely looked at. I was counting, and when I came to stall 15, I saw her there. It occurs to me now that I don't think I'd ever told you what my mother looked like. She's not a tall woman, maybe 5'4", with a head of corn silk colored hair and a smile that takes up a whole room. She was dressed in a simple dress, the one I had always seen her in. But her eyes, the same eyes I have, were the color of the ocean on a summer day. She looked up, as if on cue, and smiled at me as she spread her arms wide, inviting me in for a hug. "Welcome, Angel. I've waited so very long to see you. Come give your mother a hug." "Mom?" I half whispered, not sure this could be real, but wanting it to be true so badly. "Of course, Angel. Who else could it be?" She held her arms out, waiting for me to take the hint, and I ran to her. I dropped to my knees, wrapping my arms around her as we embraced. Her scent was familiar, a fragrance I had smelled in the bathroom during my childhood. It was jasmine and saffron, honeysuckle, old baby powder, the ghosts that haunted that bathroom. I'd seen Dad come in sometimes when I was getting ready for school or learning to use the toilet and just breathe in like he couldn't get enough of the smell. He would smile sadly, looking at me like I might be a ghost too, and then pat my head before going on his way. Her arms were warm as they wrapped around me, and I felt my eyes beginning to tear up. "I've waited to meet you for so long. I'm so proud of you, Angel. I'm so proud of the woman that you've grown up to be. I love you, dear." I felt the tears coming harder, but as I basked in the smell, this little voice kept clawing at the back of my brain. She didn't even know I existed until I was 6. She doesn't know anything about you, so how could she be proud? She hadn't even seen me till a day ago in years. How could she know me? She knew nothing about me. She knows nothing about me. Then my eyes popped open and I took a closer look at the smiling woman I was hugging. She looked like I had known she would, blonde and smiling and slight, but that was how I had expected her to look. She looked exactly like she had on the show, like exactly the way she had looked on the show. She looked as if she hadn't changed at all since I was 6. And that was the problem. "Just like you wanted," said a voice from behind me, and I heard Brother Thomas approaching. "She's exactly what you wanted. She can always be exactly what you wanted if you stay with us. Aren't you tired of looking for purpose, Angel? Aren't you tired of wondering what could be? Well, wonder no more. Come join the bright, and all your worries will be as nothing. But I took my arms off her and stood up suddenly. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds easy, but you have no idea how hard it was to take my arms off the woman who looked like my mother. She was saying the things I had always longed to hear, giving me the affirmation that I had craved, but it wasn't real. The smells were things that she would not have been able to keep in this world. The words were ideas that she had never expressed any of the times that I had seen her, and it was all a little too good to be true. I could almost feel my fingers creaking as I released her. My hands coming undone was a misery. But as I stood up, I wiped my tears away and looked at Thomas with real anger. "That isn't my mother." "What?" Thomas said, his smile brittle as he took a step back. "Of course it is. Don't lie to me, you son of a bitch. I know that's not my mom. She's the mom I wanted, but she isn't my real mom. She's probably up at that chapel, and I think you've delayed me long enough." I made to step past him, but he put a hand out to stop me. "Angel, this is what the Bright has given you. It's best not to spit on its gifts. This is what you wanted, thus the Bright has provided. Why not stay with a mother that will love you, that will be proud of you, that will shackle me to this place forever? Not likely." Thomas laughed, shaking his head. If you think your mother will be any better, then you are in for quite a shock. Why not stay here with this one? Have the mother you always wanted, the mother you deserve. Don't throw away your happiness for a mother that will never love you." He smiled at me, clearly meaning for it to be reassuring, but I shrugged his hand off. I'd rather be disappointed than live a lie. I walked past him, Thomas watching me pass a few of the stalls before calling out to me. "Angel, if you leave the Wonder Barn, there won't be any coming back. You won't be able to bask in the comfortable warmth of your mother again, and I won't be able to help you with the consequences. Come back, be happy, or proceed into misery. The choice is yours." I had stopped. God, I wanted to go back and have a mother who loved me. I could already see a nice little house for the two of us, something near the general store. We could cook meals and worship the Bright and be happy. She would braid my hair in the evenings. I could read to her. She would put me to bed and tell me how much she loved me, and I would never have to wander again. A very comfortable lie that I could stay caged in forever. I walked to the exit and closed the barn door behind me, closing out that comfortable delusion forever. I could still see the lights burning in the chapel on the hill. I made for it, and the consequences be damned. Every step from the Wonder Barn felt like it might easily be my last. I wanted so badly to turn around and see my mother, the fake mother who had embraced me and told me how proud she was of me. Brother Thomas had been right. It was a devious trap, and I would never escape from it if I went back. This cold, quiet village was realer than anything I would find in there. If I wanted to find my mother, I would have to go where she was, and the softly glowing church near the back of the field seemed like a great place to start. I moved cautiously between the dark buildings, the windows looking down on me like unhappy old men. I could just imagine faces looking down from those windows, or worse still, the doors swinging open and hooded figures coming out with hatchets and sickles and pitchforks. If they were watching me walk down the evenly cobbled street, however, they were content to watch. I was unaccosted as I made my way towards the church, and when something squalled like a cat to my left, it made me feel like my skin might leap off and take flight. turned out to be a playground, the merry-go-round moving slightly in the breeze. There were 2 slides, a jungle gym, a merry-go-round that had nearly caused me to soil myself, and some swings that were also moving in small, lazy arcs in the wind. For some reason, it looked so desolate amongst these Puritan dwellings, and the sight of it made me even more nervous than the houses. Did children actually play here? It seemed hard to believe that a community like this had children, but I suppose they must. Might I have played here if my mother had been successful in my abduction? I didn't know, but I decided to move on before I could think about it too much. The playground was at the edge of a wood fence, and the fence held in a field of what appeared to be corn. The stalks had been picked clean this time of year, and the skeletal remnants moved in the wind like ghostly wind chimes. I heard the corn husks scuttle across the ground as the breeze blew them, and the sound sent mouse feet across my spine. There was a little pathway leading to the church, and as I took my first step down the path, I saw that I had been wrong. Half the field was corn, but the other half was wheat. I knew that the farm had animals too, at least they had on the show. They had cows, chickens, ducks, pigs, sheep, even a few turkeys. The turkeys had been on a seasonal episode, and they had kind of freaked me out as a kid. They had people names, all of them, and they seemed to have strangely shaped faces too, like people wearing masks. As I moved down the rows, I heard a noise in the corn, and it froze me in place. It didn't sound like a wind through the corn, not this time. This time it sounded like someone running through the stalks, and I couldn't find the source. I would catch the sway of the husks from the corner of my eye, but I wouldn't see anything when I turned to look. I made my feet move, made myself walk the path, and it seemed to follow me as I went. Was it one of the farm people? Was it something worse? Maybe even something that had gotten loose from the barn? I didn't know, but I made myself walk slowly and confidently up the row. Everyone said that you couldn't let things know when you were afraid of them. If they knew you were afraid, it just made them much more likely to chase you. I didn't feel much like being chased, and as I came out of the corn, the runner didn't follow me, and I breathed a sigh of relief. The closer I got, the clearer I could hear the people inside the church. They were chanting in a language I didn't know, but I found I could understand. It was something guttural, something old, something utterly unpleasant. They were chanting to the bright, calling to it, beseeching it, and the light inside the chapel began to brighten and darken, brighten and darken. It was blinking faster as their fervor increased, the chanting rising and falling in time with the blinking, and the two seemed to be in symbiosis with each other. I set my hand upon the pole handle, but I couldn't find the strength to pull. The chanting rolled over me like a wave, and all the hope I had expected to find here was absent. I don't know what I had been thinking. I don't know what I had expected to find, but I had clearly been led astray. No, I knew what I had been thinking, and as I threw open the door to the chapel, the chanting stopped, but the light did not. It was like staring into the sun, like leaning down to look at a light bulb as it sits in the lamp, but about 1,000,000 times brighter. It didn't hurt my eyes the way I had expected it would, but I could feel them watering as the tears slid down my face. It was beautiful, this orb of untold brutality, and as I gazed at it, my head felt hot at the center, like the worst sunburn imaginable. The heat of it was undescribable, but that didn't hurt either. It cooked my flesh, but it just made me feel clean instead of burnt. What came next isn't going to make a lot of sense, but I'll try. The light seemed to move towards me, and the light entered me. It moved into my eyes, my ears, my mouth. It went between my toes and the webbing of my fingers. It moved into my belly button, my hair, into my more intimate areas, and it filled me with light. It felt right. It felt good, but just as fast it was gone again. It must have found something in me wanting, because it left me then, and then the light in the church burned down to the size of a bonfire as it returned to the altar at the front. Once it had gone down a little, I could see the congregants that I had missed before. The church, as it turned out, was full. There were about 40 people, all of them dressed in old-timey clothes, and it looked like an assembly of Mennonites. They were all staring at me like I might sprout a second head, and when someone from the front of the church cleared their throat, I shifted my gaze. Those 3 were dressed differently, their robes white with yellow trim, and their heads were crowned with these weird yellow circles that made them look like miniature suns. The 2 men on either side were nondescript, bald with beards, but the woman by the altar took my breath away. It was her. It was my mother. She looked like a dark mirror of the woman that I had seen in the Wonder Barn. Her corn silk hair was wild, frizzed around her skull like a kind of sloppy afro. She was pale, like someone who had never seen the sun, and her body was thin and emaciated. Her face was drawn, the flesh around her skull tight and intense, and when she saw me, I could detect nothing, none of the love that I had found from the mother in the barn. Her eyes were wet and frantic, the shining eyes of the zealot. "Brothers and sisters, it seems the Bright has decided to bless us this day. We have been sent, a believer, blood of my blood, and I wish to bring her into the fold myself. Come, angel, come and be with the Bright." I took a few steps inside. I couldn't help it. I wanted to be with her. I wanted to see her, but her words hit me like a steamroller. Come be with the Bright, not with her. She had invited me into her cult, not to be a part of her life. I remembered the words of the Not Mother in the Wonder Barn and stopped. "Angel?" she asked, her words full of distrust as opposed to concern. Come to the light, child. Come be part of the Bright." "Of the Bright," the crowd intoned. This was what Thomas had been talking about, and he had been right. She was no mother, just another mouthpiece for whatever she had signed up with. She hadn't cared about me. That much was obvious, and I wondered how I could have been so blind. I'd been caught up in the mystery, in the mysticism, and now I had fallen into the trap that my grandmother and my father had been afraid that I would stumble into. I hadn't thought of my dad in a while, not since undertaking this, and I wondered suddenly how he would feel about me being here, probably die of worry all over again. "Come, now," my mother said, and there was more growl in her voice than normal speech. "Come, come, come to the bright," they chanted, and the bonfire over the altar began to wink. "No," I said. I half whispered, taking a step back. As the crowd began to stand behind me, I realized my mistake. "What?" my mother hissed, almost incredulously. "I said no," I repeated, taking another step for the door. "This was a mistake. I see that now. I don't want to be a part of this. I'll be leaving now. You can keep whatever family this is that you made for yourself. I'll be going." But they had blocked me in. "You misunderstand," my mother said, her face growing even more crazed. "I wasn't asking whether you wanted to come to the bride or not. I was telling you to come, and so you will. The bright will judge you worthy or unworthy, and you will be burned clean, or you will be burned to ash." The crowd began to push me forward, their bodies forming a physical wall between me and the door. I tried to break through them, but they were unmoving. They never touched me. I suppose I was unclean until the bright decided I was worthy. They did, however, bump into me and block my way as they slowly walked forward, closing the gap between me and my mother. She stood grinning behind the altar like some manic bride waiting for her betrothed, and I began screaming and shoving at the assembled people as they closed ranks behind me. This was not happening. This was not how this was supposed to go. In all my dreams of finding my mother and being reunited, this had never been what I had expected. It was crying and yelling and punching and kicking and at the men and the women who were moving me closer to that crazed woman. But if they felt any of it, they never showed. I was trapped, powerless, and it seemed I was going to be judged by the bright, whether I wanted to be or not. Or so I thought. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and I saw what had been stalking me through the corn. It was the grinning tar creature, the one that had led me here, and its smile seemed all the wider now. In the light of that miniature sun, its skin seemed to ooze and melt before my very eyes, and when the people turned to see it, they screamed and began to scatter. It sniffed the air, its eyeless face scanning the room, before it fixed them on the small sun by the altar and focused itself on it. It got down on all fours and ran like a dog, brushing past me before I could get my wits about me, and made a beeline for the altar. My mother's voice was as fervent as it was terrified. "Stop it! Don't let it get near the bright! Stop it! Stop that creature!" I was running before it collided with the ball of light, seeing my escape and taking it. But as I came through the door, I was hit from behind by a hot gust of desert wind. It lifted me off my feet and threw me into the air, pushing my filthy feet out before dropping me again. I came down in the corn, luckily, and lay there trying to collect myself as my eardrums refused to register anything but a high-pitched whine. I don't know exactly how long I lay there, smelling dirt and trying to get my head to stop spinning. But as sound returned, I heard people moaning and groaning and screaming all around me. I tried to stand up, my head spun, and I lay right back down in the corn again. It took a while, but When I was able to get up without falling down, I glanced back at the chapel and saw people in similar states. The church was gone, and what remained looked like a bomb had gone off. None of the people seemed to be hurt, just disoriented, but the building had taken the brunt of whatever had happened. I stumbled out of the corn, holding my head and trying to get my bearings, when I heard my mother's voice raised in anger. I turned to find her standing in the remains of the church, her dress in tatters and her hair burnt down to a crisp. "Get her! Get her! She did this! I want her brought to me now!" I didn't think about it, and I certainly didn't wait for her congregants to get back on their feet. I pointed myself towards the spooky collection of houses, and I ran.